What brought Rome down wasn't only barbarian armies or one catastrophic battlefield defeat. The deeper collapse began when the tools inside the treasury, the quiet mechanisms used to hold society together, started rotting from within. And that detail is often glossed over in standard history retellings. If you want a simple but deep look at how money, power, and empires unravel, it may genuinely matter that you like this video and subscribe, because the goal here isn't recycled trivia, it's building the kind of perspective that helps you see the whole system. Collapse starts not with swords, but with money. When you look at the final centuries of the Roman Empire, you can see financial fractures forming before the most famous military disasters. Managing a vast territory, feeding armies, and keeping the bureaucracy alive was becoming more and more expensive, while production and real output were not rising at the same pace as those needs. And right there, Rome made one of its biggest mistakes. Instead of strengthening the system, it tried to solve growing spending by manipulating the currency. The share of precious metal in coins was reduced, more money was issued, and leaders convinced themselves they could push the problem forward. In the short run, it looked like the machine still worked. In the long run, trust began to erode. As people realized the same coin bought fewer goods, trade slowed, prices climbed, and the economy hardened from the inside. Money kept circulating, but it stopped carrying real value. Then the state tried a new fix, more control. Taxes went up, prices were interfered with, and economic freedom narrowed. Those moves didn't encourage production. They choked it. The flexibility and mobility that once powered early, Rome gradually gave way to pressure and stagnation. The empire still looked huge on a map, but economically it was shrinking. That's why what truly weakened Rome wasn't a blow from outside, but broken financial balance at home. In the next chapter, we'll walk through how this financial collapse landed on ordinary people and why Roman society eventually couldn't carry the weight anymore, explaining Rome's financial collapse only through decay in the state treasury misses the real breaking point. The true fracture appeared when that decay began to shape everyday life for ordinary people. As money lost value, the same labor brought less in return. Wages looked like they were rising on paper, but purchasing power was falling. This hit urban craftsmen, small merchants, and wage earners the hardest. People kept working, yet they could no longer get by because their income eroded faster than it grew. Taxes, meanwhile, did not ease. On the contrary, they increased. To compensate for shrinking revenues, the state spread the tax burden across the wider population, making the system even more fragile. In Rome, taxation stopped being the price of order and turned into a struggle for survival. Large landowners pushed the burden onto peasants, and peasants tried to endure through debt. As debt grew, freedom shrank. Many people became effectively bound to their land or profession, just to keep up with what they owed. At that point, Roman society began to freeze economically. Risk-taking declined, trade networks narrowed, and production slowed further under mounting subsistence pressures. The system had shifted away from rewarding those who worked, toward rewarding those who could collect. The invisible contract between the people and the state broke down. Even though citizens paid their taxes, they no longer felt they received security, stability, or prosperity in return. This loss of trust was more destructive than battlefield defeats, because the empire ultimately drew its strength from popular consent. When consent faded, loyalty weakened with it. Rome still looked powerful, but society no longer wanted to carry that power. For people crushed under economic pressure, the empire stopped feeling like protection and began to feel like a burden. From this moment on, Rome's collapse entered a phase that could no longer be reversed. In the next chapter, we'll examine how the state responded with harsher controls and why those policies only made the situation worse. When the Roman state realized that the population was growing, poorer and revenues were falling, it didn't try to relieve the system. It tightened its grip. Instead of restoring economic movement, the first response was stricter enforcement. Prices were controlled, caps were placed on wages and essential goods, and trade was subjected to heavier oversight. But these interventions didn't solve the problem. They deepened it. The economy stopped being guided by trust and began to operate under fear. Producers could no longer set prices for what they sold. Merchants couldn't predict whether they would make a profit. In that kind of environment, no one wanted to invest. What had once made early Rome strong was flexibility. In its later period, that flexibility disappeared entirely. The state began fixing people in place, not just prices. Farmers were bound to their land, craftsmen to their professions. Movement, relocation, and the search for new opportunities were blocked. In the short term, this looked like it protected the tax base. But in the long run, it killed economic vitality. Production grows through incentives, not coercion. Rome was no longer a growing economy. It had become a system trying to hold itself upright by force. As control increased, the market shrank. As the market shrank, the state imposed even more control. This vicious cycle slowly clogged Rome's financial arteries. People produced less, traded less, and took fewer risks. Risk no longer offered reward, only punishment. Money circulation slowed, taxes were collected by force, and the system hardened further. Rome was still an empire, but it was no longer an economic engine. It had become a heavy burden. In the next chapter, we'll look at how this pressure weakened Rome's military strength and borders, and how a collapse that began with money ultimately showed itself on the battlefield. As Rome's economic structure hardened, the army was the first to pay. The real price, and this connection, is often overlooked. The Roman army did not stand on discipline alone. It relied on regular pay, expectations of reward, and the economic security the system once provided. As money lost value, soldiers' wages rose in name but lost their real meaning. The same pay now bought less food, less equipment, and less certainty. This quietly drained morale. Rome responded by expanding compulsory service, but that move reduced quality instead of restoring strength. Where the army had once been sustained by volunteers, status, and economic promise, it was now filled through obligation and pressure. Financial weakness also hit logistics. Supplying, equipping, and maintaining armies along distant frontiers became increasingly difficult. As the tax system faltered, support from the provinces broke down, and soldiers began extracting resources directly from local populations. That shift fueled resentment and hostility toward Rome. The army slowly ceased to be a shield for the people and became an added burden on their lives, corroding loyalty from within. To preserve military capacity, Rome increased its reliance on mercenaries, but their commitment to Roman order was fragile. When payments were delayed or reduced, they had little hesitation in switching sides. At this stage, financial instability was no longer just an economic problem. It had become a direct security threat. Borders still existed on maps, but in reality they were no longer defensible. Rome was not destroyed by a single decisive battle. The collapse that began with money quietly weakened the army's structure and spirit. In the next chapter, we'll examine how this military fragility tore holes in Rome's borders and how financial decay pushed the empire past the point of no return. The weakening of Rome's financial structure showed its consequences most clearly along the borders, because frontiers are where a strong economy is tested first. When soldiers' pay was delayed, logistics broke down, and local support faded. Borders stopped functioning as lines of security and turned into fragile seams. That is exactly what happened in Rome. As the center weakened, the provinces began looking after themselves. Taxes failed to reach the capital, and local authorities started holding on to resources. This fractured Rome's financial unity. Soldiers stationed on the frontiers were no longer properly fed, equipped, or reinforced. At this stage, external threats did not suddenly grow stronger. Rome's ability to stop them simply declined. Barbarian incursions should not be seen as the cause, but as the natural outcome of this decay. An economy that has collapsed cannot defend its borders. More importantly, people living in frontier regions stopped seeing the empire as their own system. When economic benefit disappeared, Roman citizenship lost its meaning as a privilege. People felt they were paying taxes in exchange for protection, only to find themselves trapped in a structure that demanded loyalty but offered nothing in return. This psychological break was more destructive than any military breach. Rome survived not only by the sword, but by economic promises. When the flow of money stopped, loyalty stopped with it. Many border regions were lost not through battle, but through neglect. The center no longer had the resources to halt the collapse. The empire still looked vast on the map, but it was hollow inside. Rome's greatest tragedy lay here. The destruction did not happen overnight. It advanced silently over many years. In the next and final chapter, we will close by drawing the central lesson from this long decline and discussing what Rome's financial collapse still tells us today. When looking back at the fall of the Roman Empire, searching for a single moment, a single battle, or a single enemy is a serious mistake. What destroyed Rome was not a sudden odour, but a structural decay that began with money and deepened over many years. When the economy drifted away from production, when money lost its ability to carry real value, and when the system stopped inspiring trust, the empire began collapsing under its own weight. Even at the height of its power, Rome depended on financial balance. Once that balance failed, military strength, borders, and authority collapsed in sequence. A system that survives on taxation but cannot encourage production, cannot keep money circulating, and tries to solve problems by increasing control is not built to last. Rome's greatest mistake was trying to mask financial problems with temporary fixes. More money was issued, rules became harsher, people were locked in place, but no new value was created. Over time, this slowly detached society from the system itself. When we study Rome today, we are not only reading history, we are reading the present. Any structure that appears strong but loses financial trust, productive capacity, and flexibility will face the same fate. Rome's most important lesson is clear. Instead of forcing the system to survive for the sake of money, the economic foundations that support the system must be strengthened. Real power does not come from controlling money, but from making money trustworthy. Rome was not destroyed by the sword, it was destroyed by money. And what broke that money were poor decisions and lost balance. History shows this without ambiguity. When economic balance collapses, even the greatest empires can fall silently, without needing a single enemy to strike them.